a goal for many of us is like family is the origination of love, and that's the way it's supposed to be. And so to come together in this unique way that you all did, as you know, the big Moore family, as I call it in my mind, it was very, very powerful, important to watch, and then to be invited to be part of for a little bit. That's very exciting. And I want to find the segue here to the topic of nature and the world and sustainability and all of that, because I think, you know, very often the very linear masculine side of our brain is all about, well, what do we need to fix to change the world? And really the red thread is well, let's fall in love with nature again. Let's fall in love with the world we live in, right? Because that's actually the common language that I think all living beings share, is the feeling of being alive is ultimately a connection. And that connection is a connection of love, not in a romantic sense. You said that really well, Phil. And so I'm curious, Phil, I know from you that in the Ecological Awareness Center and in school. Welcome back to Green Planet, Blue Planet podcast. I'm here today for a roundtable conversation and episode on the topic of regenerative education. We often talk about environmental stewardship, social responsibility, resilience, and all things regeneration on this podcast. And so I'm super excited today to have three people on. That is Hope Peterson, Catherine Fraze, and Philip Moore. Welcome, you three. Well, I'd love to start with introductions just a little bit and set the context for education and you know, where in the world you're sitting today, and what work you're creating in the world, and how that relates to regenerative education or education in a love-based sense. Hope, why don't you start?
Okay, it's such a pleasure to be here in our little Zoom screens. I'm physically sitting in a small town in Quebec, Canada. And I guess a good place to start would be, I would say I'm a mother first and foremost, a mother of two, and I've been a global nomad for my whole life, bouncing around the world, exploring, meeting people, and following my curiosity. And this has, being a mother, my curiosity, and decades of being an entrepreneur, both building my own businesses and coaching other people to build their businesses. About 10 years ago, it struck me that there was really a lot of grown-ups who were feeling blocked and stuck, feeling like their education, their early lives were really stopping them from really following their curiosity, from being themselves, from really lighting up the world and seeing their vision, making an impact. And I also at the same time had two small children, watching them be in the regular school system and seeing how outdated and how restrictive the education system was for our future generation. So I brought my experience with entrepreneurship, my global nomadism, my curiosity, and being a mother. And I've started to blend all of these together. We can call it into a hope soup. And I have been creating spaces for people to come together and talk about the future of learning, talk about future of entrepreneurship and innovation in a really diverse, hopeful, and inspiring way. I do this in a few different ways, and I would say I have the pleasure of having Phil and Catherine join me whenever they can. I run a global brain trust, which is basically an incredible community of innovators of all ages. We have young students, we have academics, we have researchers, we have ed tech, we have dreamers coming together in a regular rhythm to sync up and put our finger on the pulse of what's happening and share and grow together. And that's really enabled people to forge new partnerships, see things they wouldn't otherwise in their own silos, and break open and start to really discuss and explore new paradigms for the future of learning, regenerative or any model, really. And in other ways, I have had the fortune of syncing up and collaborating with individuals within this brain trust. So Phil and I are delivering an amazing program, his Sacred Summer this summer. So I've been able to coach and mentor and support a lot of these individual businesses and people working in education, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And I'll just end by saying what's bringing me the most hope in the future of education and regenerative practices is learning with younger people, watching my own kids have the freedom and flexibility to learn and grow in different ways, and to learn with younger people. I think we have so much to learn from them, with them, and it's given me a lot of hope to start there, seeing these seedlings that already have so much potential and promise kind of come to life and remind the older generations of what's possible.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Hope. And I want to hear more about that brain trust. Catherine, how about you? You're in Montana today, is that right?
Right. Yes. I'm sitting right by the West Boulder River, in nature, surrounded by nature. And I just love hearing your story, Hope. You're so inspirational, and it's great to see you too, Phil and Julian again. So, gosh, where do I start? I've spent my whole life in education, starting out as a teacher and spending a long time in Montessori education before, spending homeschooling my children actually, and spending a lot of time in community with lots of different families and trying to help them solve their educational needs. And out of that, I created a 32,000 square foot makerspace for all these families to come together to co-create the education they needed to make sure that all their kids were being lit up with what they were doing on the ground. And then when COVID happened, I decided I would see if I could recreate the magic of what we had on the ground at Workspace in the sky. So we created Workspace Sky, which was a big co-working space for teens. And now we are creating ecosystems for learning. So what that means is we're recreating innovation labs in different places. And then we are adding lots of different learning hubs and field sites to the innovation center. So when the kids visit, they can not only be in a physical space with all these kids doing great activities, but then they can bop around the network, visiting all these different field sites and great learning places around. So I've also been participating in a regenerative school. It's a school for human development for the last 3 years. It's the work of Carol Sanford, and she wants to make sure that any kind of education model or anything that goes out, if we're creating new structures, that they're regenerative, that they're restoring or optimizing society so that everyone can have a meaningful and fulfilling life and go out in the world and fully express their essence. So I feel my role is to be a shepherd for anything that we're creating in education, that it is done using regenerative principles and making sure that everyone can fully and authentically express their essence in the world. And that's what really lights me up. So that's me in a nutshell. Julian, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Phil, you've been on the podcast a few times before, and you're actually right now my neighbor. You're sitting in a different room, but just about 5 minutes down the road. What context are you bringing into the conversation today, Phil? Knowing that you have a deep and vast knowledge on the embodied path of love-based education, and just encouraging that essence, uniqueness, and curiosity, and I guess all beings, not just young beings.
Yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity to be here with these two beautiful women and you, and I'm inspired by them. That I think that for me, the context would be that when I was in second grade, I was aware that something was wrong with education, and I think it's a soul thing. I think that my soul, perhaps in other bodies and other lives, found themselves sitting in a classroom going, wait a second, this is not right. This teacher should not be able to make fun of my friend Douglas because he stutters, and so I just had that sense very early on. And my soul's code led me to the work of Buckminster Fuller. And I'm here in the Blue Ridge Mountains. This is where Buckminster Fuller, the year I was born in 1948, made the first geodesic dome, which fell down. So we call it the supine dome. And the next summer in 1949, it stayed and is now ubiquitous throughout the world and in every science fiction movie. And I'm just here in the Blue Ridge Mountains for 3 years after having created a community that we call a learning community. Upland Hills School and Upland Hills Ecological Awareness Center were the two nonprofits on a farm called Upland Hills Farm next to a monastery. And so it was an amazing unfolding, the learning community experience. And it's thriving. And I had to figure out the part that was, how does somebody who has been a co-founder of a place find another place and leave so that the people who are there can really do the work that they need to do and experience their soul's code. So it's only been 3 years here, but during the time that I lived there, we were not just into regen, we were into gen, meaning that we were generating power from the wind in 1973. It was just one of those things that we as young teachers wanted to show the kids that we were not just talking about doing something that was good for the future of our beautiful planet, that we would spend a lot of the teaching budget of that year on a wind generator. That wind generator is now an artifact, but it's influenced many children. And the thing that I love to say about loving well over 1,000 children into being is that in this part of my life, in what I'm calling my rewirement, part 3, I am still doing that soul's code because it's still in me. And its mission is to bring a love-based education to every child on the planet. And so that's the kind of thing that, you know, that you do until you drop this body. And at present, as Hope said, I'm working with her and inspired to be bringing to life and into and actualizing the material that was in the book called The Future of Children that I wrote in 2017.
Yeah, brilliant. I love these introductions because there's, you know, so much amazing work that all three of you are doing in the world. And I feel like a red thread that connects all of us. And, you know, that is the inroad to, you know, what follows in this conversation is that, you know, we all come together in these kind of, you know, brain, hope you call it a brain trust, or Phil, you call it these different stages of collaboration or rewirement in your life, right? And Catherine, you talked about, you know, having a background in Montessori and, you know, now branching out into how can we use those modern times and these post-COVID times to come together both in space as well as, you know, digitally. And I think we're at a time now where it's really clear to some people, maybe even many people, that parts of the old system have just failed our humanity, and that humanity is what takes care of the planet and takes care of each other. And so what we all have in common is that we create these kind of brain trusts and these kind of circles of people that are actually enabling each other to fully step into leadership and into leading the way forward. And I'd love to hear, you know, just in whatever kind of popcorn style, from who feels inspired from the three of you, like how that occurred in your life, that you realized that what really makes the world go round is the people that gather and the way we come together. And maybe there's an anecdote or two that you can share for everyone listening in how to find not one's tribe in order to separate more into tribalism, but one's tribe to understand this is my cohort of people with whom I'm really able to live the change that I want to live and be the change that I came to be. How did that work for each of you?
Well, for me, it really is being in that group, and it's something that Thich Nhat Hanh called the interbeing. When two people are together and connecting, as I've done with both of these amazing women and with you, Julian, there's this interbeing that's very alive. And if you get a bunch of people together, and when I say a bunch, our school is about 80 to 90 students, you know, ages 4 to 14. But just recently, we had a family reunion here this last week, and there were 60 people, and there were 6 generations together. Whenever you do that with the intention of love is your north on your compass, and healing, because there's so much that needs to happen in order for us to be sane or coherent in an insane world. And what happens, and what happened just recently here at Highland Lake Cove, was that this family reunion turned into some kind of alchemy that helped everybody and touched everybody, from the youngest member, 3 years old, to the oldest member, somewhere in the 90s. And on that, when that happens, it regenerates you. So that's where the word comes back again, because then you just feel like, wow, this was so spectacular and so rare and so wonderful. Wouldn't it be great if others could also experience this? So whether you're Hope or whether you're Kath or whether you're you, Julian, I think that's what you do. You create initiatives and you make moves in what I call the infinite game, a game where there are no losers, a game where you play with the rules rather than by them, a game that you play in order to leave your legacy. And I think that's what connects all of us. I think every one of us is making a move and making moves consistent with the infinite game that we're playing.
I think when I heard you say, when I first heard you introduce the infinite game, which would probably be about 1.5 years ago, it struck me in my chest. Like I'd known it for my whole life, but I actually had never really heard it before. And I think it gave a structure to something that felt so familiar and so human. And so thank you for introducing me and so many people. And I would also resonate with the idea of when you love yourself and you really honor and really take the time and presence to love yourself, then that resonates out. And back to the regenerative, like when you build, a strong foundation, you're able to then regenerate or offer that outwards. And I would say that would be a lesson I've learned of bringing people together when there's love in the picture, when you are loving yourself and modeling it for yourself first, then people will feel that and they're able to, especially young people, they're able to see that that's possible. I think there's a lot of disharmony, there's some dysfunction, there's negativity in the world, as there always has been. But I think being a beacon of love and presence, especially for young people, when we're thinking about the future of learning and the future of education, I think pulsing that out, it gravitates the right people, right, Julian? Like, I'm sure the more you are yourself, the more people come into your space that resonate with who you are.
Yes, I'd like to chime in, if I may. I've had a couple of experiences, one as a teenager when I was reading a spiritual text, and then one when I was at Teachers College with a mentor that produced this spontaneous and deep internal sobbing that had sort of occurred in me, and which I couldn't stop. It was like this big emotional outpouring, and it gave me really strong signals that I was in alignment. And with these, with the words I was reading that had this effect in me, these have stayed with me my whole life. So I imagine this must be some kind of soul awakening to something, but they were usually attributed to either a group or a person. And this happened when I was experiencing something really so deep and meaningful that they've stayed with me my whole life and been a little bit of a north star for what I'm doing. So building that awareness in humans and young humans and the youth is really important to me. Like how can they learn to listen and observe themselves and how they're reacting to things, so they really sense their resonance and get a window into their soul, so they know what their life's work is. I think that's really important. That will help them gravitate to the right people, I think.
I love that. And I love all three of those perspectives. And, the wording infinite game, Phil, you definitely brought that into my life too a few years ago. And it's very close in my own inner compass to, Catherine, what you just mentioned, like life's work or life's purpose, right? And I feel like that's a term that, from a perspective of maybe separation, it's quite a big term and a very external term of like, okay, so what's my thing to do in the world, right? And I've noticed over the years that my moves in the game of life are different moves if I play the infinite game or if I play a confused game or a separated game or a game of short-term gain or whatever it might be. And to me, increasingly, it becomes easier and easier based on the cohorts of people, the groups of people, the spaces that I say yes to in my life. But I also want to be very real. I think for a lot of people out in the world, it can be really difficult too. If you're in an environment of distraction or separation, or you're maybe not quite in that space yet where you have your own group or your own cohort or your own brain trust. What are some, maybe not words of advice, but like just some pointers that you all have for people that are kind of halfway in between, where it's like, I experienced this and I do want to move more into connection, but it's also challenging, right?
Well, from my own personal experience on the ground, when I started Workspace, I was trying to find other people doing similar education models. And the way that I found my education people was to go to conferences and just go to the sessions that I thought were most meaningful and the most in line with my personal educational philosophy. And what I found was that the same people would show up at the same sessions from conference to conference. I kept on bumping into the same people. And they, over time, just like, okay, these are my people. And then they introduced me to the people that weren't quite there in the circle. And, some of the people I'm working with today, when I first met them 6 years ago, we're still very tight from these very first sessions where we first got together. So that was my strategy.
I would say that actually Phil and Kath have been amazing beacons for humans that that give constantly to other people, and without any specific regard to what's coming back directly. I think that would be one piece, not of advice, but something that I would share with someone who's confused or not sure how to build connections or what the next step could be, is find people who inspire you and find a way to give, to support, to lend a hand, or even just to have a conversation. Because to give without regard to like, I want money or I want this, but really just to give and to explore further of why that person's fascinating you or inspiring you, can create a really beautiful connection, which usually snowballs and momentum grows, and you might meet their friends or their people. And I would say that happened to both Kath and Phil and myself. As soon as I tapped into their portal offering to give, or they were giving, worlds opened up. It was amazing.
Yeah, those are, I agree with both of those. And I think that there's sometimes this idea of intention where you think you have to come up with the intention and then you follow that intention, and then some things, magical things occur when that happens. I think sometimes intention is looking for you, that there's some great soul mystery at work that's looking for you. And if you are prepared to fall in love, so I guess my advice would be live with an open heart. Bucky said very simply, dare to be naive. If you prepare to fall in love, and you can't prepare, but if that's natural to you, you meet somebody and your heart just goes out and you realize, wow, I love this person. I certainly can say about the three of you, that's how it was for me. Now, you don't say I'm in love with you, and you don't say I just fell in love with you. But what happens is you're feeling that aliveness. And that aliveness is using you. It's coming through you. That aliveness is really the universe pulsing through you, living you. And I think it's not the kind of advice that you follow. It's just knowing that falling in love, leads to is what the great mystery wants for all of us. As a species, maybe that's what Jean Houston is speaking of when she says future humans, become a future human, and in doing that, you just will attract to you these other people who've been waiting, and in some cases for a long time, and sometimes so closed that they just can't allow themselves to open. But the miracle of this last retreat here with my family is I saw someone who I love very much, and I've known since I was 13 years old, and I saw anxiety melt and love take its place. And I just was like blown away by that. I said, I would have never guessed that would have been possible. And who knows how long it'll be sustained, but falling in love.
That's beautiful. I'm so glad and honored, Phil, that I was able to be part of a dinner of that family retreat and reunion that you just described. And I think a very important part to add to that is that there's a magic in spaces where there is an intergenerational exchange, right? Where there's kids of all ages and then there's adults of all ages. And you just realize that just in the non-spoken space, in the non-verbal space, there's a lot of information going around that kind of, balances out our nervous systems maybe, or just allows people to melt that anxiety and remember that, like, family is, it's this sounds, well, maybe it's like almost a goal for many of us, is like family is the origination of love, and that's the way it's supposed to be. And so to come together in this unique way that you all did, as the big Moore family, as I call it in my mind, it was very, very powerful, important to watch, and then to be invited to be part of for a little bit. That's very exciting. And I want to find the segue here to the topic of nature and the world and sustainability and all of that, because I think, very often the very linear masculine side of our brain is all about, well, what do we need to fix to change the world? And really the red thread is well, let's fall in love with nature again. Let's fall in love with the world we live in, right? Because that's actually the common language that I think all living beings share, is the feeling of being alive is ultimately a connection. And that connection is a connection of love, not in a romantic sense. You said that really well, Phil. And so I'm curious, Phil, I know from you that in the Ecological Awareness Center and in school, Upland Hills, you were, really, really clear that nature was always the primary teacher. How does that relate to the work Hope and Catherine, you both do, especially in a digital space? Like, how easy is it to understand that about someone else through the screen, that person is actually fundamentally also in love with nature, and that's why we're meeting, and the nature in themselves,
Oh, that's a great question. Wow. It's something we're on Zoom rather a lot, or at least I am. And
we're here right now too. Yeah.
I know. And I'm looking at your background. I do look at people's backgrounds, but I do my best to, as Phil was talking about the interbeing, I try to feel in as much as I can to the humans, the energy. I think we can definitely feel the energy through this technology. And I try my best also to, in whatever orchestration or group or one-on-one, make it as interactive as possible. Remind us that, I can see you and we can interact. And I think I'm a bit against formalities. And so I try to play when we're online. Sometimes I come on with wigs. Sometimes I, try and encourage people to laugh and giggle and connect and cry and have these really human, intimate moments. And then obviously I try to get out into nature myself so that I'm seeding that. What about you, Kath?
Yeah, I agree with you. So yes, we are in a digital world, but we're not there all the time. So, I really feel like it's a question of balance. We want the human connection, and, some people are very isolated. So to be able to pull them into a space and give them opportunities to actually interact with people that they wouldn't normally interact with on a day-to-day basis, I think is really important. sometimes, you might get Lyme disease, for example, and you might be in hospital for 3 months. Wouldn't it be great if we could keep an interactive virtual physical space going so that they don't miss a beat, and can still connect with their friends? And as far as creating relationships, I obviously it's better in person. There's the mojo that happens when you're with people, but there's also mojo I've discovered in online spaces. And just yesterday, I was asked to install a memorial tree for someone who had passed away in one of our school communities inside the virtual space, where they're going to gather their whole community around the tree and then walk past the tree. And I was thinking, wow, that's kind of a milestone, right? Like, this is a gathering to find meaning and making a memorial for someone, and they're going to be reminded of that. So, I don't think that children should be on screens all the time, but I think it has use as a tool. And as long as it's not, for a big percentage of the day, and that they're moving around in the virtual space as well as moving around outside and having that variety and novelty, then I think it can be an addition to what they're currently doing, but definitely not a full alternative.
Phil, do you have anything to add about the digital space?
Well, it's amazing how powerful the digital space can be, and it does things that nothing else can. And so actually, when I first met Kath, she introduced me to something that I didn't know was a possibility until she did, and then I saw its utility and value right away, especially because she was using it at that time, and perhaps still is, to help people in Ukraine to find each other who were refugees and to come together in a safe place and to be able to be teenagers or to be able to be themselves. And the icons and could turn into actual conversations. And then I was just, of course, thinking about, well, there's an infinite potential for the tools that we have made if we use them in a wise way and we curate those with love as the North Star. I was like, wow, that's an amazing thing to be able to do. Bombs are going off. I can't go outside. But if I have a signal and I can communicate with somebody and have this moment that really transcends space and time, then, oh my gosh, it just felt like that would be a beautiful way of using this technology. So, Bucky was very much into designing tools, and he felt that you could reform the environment easier than you can reform the individual. And so if you bank a turn where there's lots and lots of accidents, and rather than put signs and flashing lights on it, and you just make it so that when you turn, your car goes that way. I mean, that was an example that he gave of, you redesign the environment. If you teach, as we did in a geodesic dome, for most of your teaching career, you're really living in a spherical world, which is our sun, our moon, the earth. You really see that it affects you enormously, far more than you would guess, to not be in a rectangle and to be in a sphere, or to always see the triangles of the dome. You start looking for them everywhere else. You see something framed right outside of your house right now, Julian, and you see that if there were no triangles, that would not stand. And you begin to understand, oh, this is how nature coordinates herself. And you go into a store here and you see a perfect octahedron, and you say, what's that? Well, that's fluorite. And then you begin to see, oh, this is the natural world. Everywhere you look, you begin to see that there's this pattern that connects us all. And so that's all I have to say about this.
I do love it. I mean, there's a light bulb that instantly goes off when you say that spaces, impact us much more than we might think, especially rectangular spaces. I went to a public school in Germany, and then worked in a Waldorf school, a Steiner school later on for a year. And I remember one of the first things I learned about Steiner's approach was that he insisted on children learning in any space but rectangular spaces, basically, because rectangular spaces are so linear that our mind then mirrors the linearity rather than being kind of enamored, right, by the shapes and sizes and forms around us that allow us to basically connect to our imagination and connect to the physical space around us. It does have a huge impact on my mood. And, that's one of the reasons why I ask about the digital space, more so because I believe that it is just a tool, and it is totally possible to use these tools in a benevolent way, just like many other tools. And I know that a lot of people experience this nowadays, where it's almost paradoxical. We're talking about education in a love-based way, or we're talking about regeneration and falling in love with nature and acting from that inspiration. And yet here I am looking into that rectangle that is my MacBook, right? And so I have a follow-up question, and that's about AI and the idea of artificial intelligence. And, it's the middle of 2023 as we're recording this. And I guess without needing to be experts on the topic, what do you all feel are some of the very unique possibilities for the space of education, and maybe even lifelong, education and inspiration that can happen through AI? And what do you individually see as maybe a threat or two where, and I'm happy to share too, but something where you're like, I am just not sure if this is going to be good for us. I'd love to hear some honest thoughts on AI here.
I would say that I've had the honor of having a number of people in my brain trust share or deliver their opinion or their expertise, newly found expertise or tools using AI as a way to learn myself and expose to different perspectives, but also to put it out there and see how people respond. And my favorite was you know what I'm going to say, Catherine, was a session with a 12-year-old who is now going across the US. His father's helping him set it up, but he really is the primary lead on this approach to teaching people in their later generations about how to use AI, how to approach it, how to consider it. He spends a considerable amount of time learning about what's happening, because the space in AI is evolving literally every day. And what I loved about him was he was quite matter of fact, and the metaphors he used, he said, it's happening, it's here, and we may as well get comfortable to use it, to understand it, to not be threatened by it. And when you approach new technology like that, this is spoken from a 12-year-old to a room of educators who all had their various, concerns and fears and perspectives. And he said, how many of you who are feeling very scared about AI have been using it? And very few people put their hand up. And I think so often we can get in a mentality, especially as grown-ups, in our squares, in our linear thinking of like, this is the way, new technology is coming and it's going to be threatening and it's going to take away all the jobs. And here was a 12-year-old putting his hand up saying, I highly recommend, before you really state how it's going to be, is to start familiarizing and seeing how you might be able to weave it into your life. And then he gave lots of examples. So I guess for me, I am exploring it with a beginner's mind. I want to be naive, but it's a technology that will shift things considerably, I feel. I'm open and I'm exploring.
I love AI. I use it all the time, and I just see so much value in it, in being able to draw out the inner thoughts and in the soul of each child by giving them these tools where they can actually authentically and fully express themselves. Like, for example, if they can't draw, but they really have an idea and they want to get that picture out into the world, they can learn mid-journey and generate and keep regenerating ideas until they can get something that's really honed into exactly what they have in their mind, which I think is very powerful, especially for young children. And the same with writing. I struggled, in my early life with writing, and now I can just do speech to text, get all my thoughts on paper, give it to ChatGPT, and get it transformed into a really beautiful structure that sounds good and is, and I can change it into anything. So, there's a lot of kids that have a blockage in writing. We can remove these blockages by giving them a set of tools and it will help them gain intellectual confidence and just confidence in general in themselves. And I think that's a huge step in helping them develop their agency in the world and to become self-determined. So for me, I couldn't be more excited. I mean, I know there's fears, and I think there, with any new technology, there's always going to be a lot of fear out there. But, I think as humans, we just need to shepherd the use of it. And I think those things will happen just like seatbelts happened over time. And I'm actually very optimistic. But where it touches my heart is the impact it can have on those learners who struggle to get their soul out into the world in their essence. So I feel good about it.
Well, I would say I'm one who has not used it very much, so I know very little about its uses. and thanks to Hope, I've been exposed to it through the Hope Brain Trust. And so that's been very helpful. And then I was on a panel with a guy who has a company, and it was all AI. And the conference I was at was happening because of the amount of money that came from his company. And so I got to interact with him and hear what he had to say about education. So I would first say what we don't know is the largest domain. And what we know is the smallest domain. But from an educator's perspective, I would say that if all children were really given the same kind of love and care that we were able to do at the school for right hemisphere dominant human beings, it would be a different world. And that would be the actual creating of art, all of the creative and performing arts and all of the things that are just so special, like theater and live theater and writing plays and musicals and all of that kind of thing. If AI can take care of some of the things that we spent so much time breaking the spirit of children, how much can you memorize, And how can you communicate only with words and only with punctuation? I mean, these things have literally crippled millions and millions of human beings, especially the way that we taught them. And then I thought, well, what about memory? What if we don't need to have to really remember anything? And then I thought, well, what do I love to memorize that takes time? And I really have to put effort into it rather than saying, you remember this. I'm not going to, And then I realized that when I hear an amazing song, as somebody that's always loved music, and then I hear the lyrics of a Leonard Cohen song, and I think, oh, I want to embody that song, then I'll spend hours upon hours memorizing the song so it's just second nature to me, and I can feel the vibrations within. I would love to imagine a time when all of that stuff that we've crippled children with is gone, and people feel really confident about being able to write anything by way of what you were talking about, Kath, or by doing some of the research, or by finding more things out in the research than they could find out on their own. And instead of memory being about, regurgitating the so-called right answers of a test, then memory would be the thing we're passionate about. Because when we're passionate about something, memory is really important. And I'm glad I'm not reading a screen when I'm singing a song. Because when I'm singing a song, I don't want to be reading a screen. I want to be feeling those words. There's a blaze of light in every word. That's a part of a Leonard Cohen song. I want to feel that, and I want to feel it in the same melody, only I want to change it a little bit, or I want to put this emphasis, you see. So I think that there is a way of thinking about AI that could be liberating, and that could curb and maybe even halt and stop the cruelty that our educational system says 2 lines of education, mathematics and logic, language, the other ones, forget about them. I think that's one of the cruelest things that is still going on in most schools.
Yeah, I love the optimism here.
Can I say one more thing?
Oh, go ahead, Hope. Yeah.
I was just going to say that in listening to Phil, um, again, referring to this 12-year-old Kaz, and he talked about trust, which I thought is a very poignant word and feeling and emotion, and very relevant right now. I think there's a lot of people who are very distrustful of what's going to happen, what's happening with AI, and is it going to be faking and doing all of these things that we won't know who to trust? And he was focusing on this is a tool that if you trust kids to use it, to dive deep into their passion and their interests, like you're talking about, Phil, like having this amazing, capacious access to information and being able to dive deep and learn how to pull it out as opposed to, memorizing and regurgitating. He's like, if you trust kids to do that, they're going to learn in totally different ways and they'll be catapulted. And the educators were kind of sitting dumbfounded because many of them had said, we need to not let them use it because it's dangerous. And what if they look up stuff? What if they cheat? What if they cheat? And the 12-year-old was like, they're going to cheat. They're going to find other ways to cheat. So take it off the table and trust them. And I just thought that was so cool. I needed to share it.
I love it. Yeah, no, and this is a really beautiful conversation about specifically the tool of AI right now. I personally also agree that it's a tool, and so with any tool, we can learn and choose to use it wisely and use it for good things. And some people might not do that, but then the question is, should we all stay in fear and all stay in this place of let's create a restrictive society around the worst cases of fear, or is the other side of it to liberate so many and in a way of providing trust and providing the means to access tools that can ultimately really change our maybe multilateral expression also. That's a clear theme all three of you touched on. And it's to be determined. I think it will for sure bring up some things like a mirror to us humans, how we operate, right? So you just mentioned the 12-year-old saying, well, kids will cheat in exams. Yeah, that is true. And most of us did. And those who didn't at least knew someone who did. And so I think it's not so much about trying to restrict as much as to understand, maybe also where enough is enough. I think the AI will definitely show us that there is a lot of fake content out there in the world, and maybe some newspapers were all along fake, or maybe some people who run the world are all along not only positively intentioned, and we might be able to see this more than ever before. But it shouldn't stop us, I guess. I totally land on the same optimism. It shouldn't stop us to really embrace tools and
but it also might force schools to start thinking about, teaching kids to develop their own epistemologies about how do they know what they know, right? And that becomes a priority because the information is there and accessible, right? So it's really becomes a matter of how, and also relationships become a priority. Like if you don't know the student, you don't know if he's cheated really because you don't know his personality and what he knew before, and so it might force educators to know and observe their students more. And also it may change testing because you're not going to be maybe testing an essay they've sent in. It might have to be a verbal or some next generation of authentic self-expression that they have to assess. So for me, I think it could also really boost relationship, which I think is a huge component missing in the current educational system.
Yeah, that alone is a topic to dive deeper on. But I'd love to circle back on a word that was shared a few times, and that is trust. And often ask this question on Green Planet, Blue Planet podcast about how do you even experience trust in your own individual sphere? Like, how does trust occur to you? Is it a sensation in the body? Is it like just a knowing? Is it a specific set of parameters? And there's been a lot of work out there about trying to understand and define trust better, but maybe in your own words, if some of you want, like what does the process of trusting feel like for you, and how does it get easier?
Well, for our school, one of the things that occurred really early on is this falling in love part. So friendships. And then we realized how important friendships are. and close friendships, lead to broken trust, and broken trust leads to trying to figure out how to find your way back. Sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. If you can, then you're on a higher level of consciousness. And that's what's important. I think what's important about trust is you just don't give somebody your trust and then think that that's it. I mean, there's this very alive relationship that's happening. And because we're human, we'll break that trust. There are things that will occur. And then the next level of consciousness can occur if you're in a community that's a love-based community. Then there is a hope, so you can turn to the friendship between Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama. And you can say, okay, what can we learn from this friendship? And what you learn about both of them when you watch the movie Joy, the documentary, is that they both came from places where there was so much pain and so much suffering, and the need for reconciliation was so great, and revenge was always there. They're human beings, but they both chose to deal with it in a level that transmuted that. So I just love the film because I love these two men and what they represent, and the fact that whenever I think of trust, I think of, like in a marriage or whatever, what happens when that trust is broken? And is it possible to come back and find a new way of being with each other, or to still love each other and get divorced? There's conscious ways of doing all of those things. And I think in our world today, trust is really needed more than ever before, and perhaps we're being manipulated more than ever before with the technology that is doing all of that. So we have to be more vigilant about it. But I can say, in meeting all three of you, there was a moment that we were strangers, But once I, felt like, oh, this is an amazing human being, and then that was there for me. Is it possible that there would be broken trust? Absolutely. I've lived enough to know that that's what we do as human beings. But I do know it's possible for us to still become even friends at a deeper level. And that really is what gives me hope.
And as you always say, investing in bonds. I love that. That for me is playing the long game in our relationships, and showing up over and over again, showing up. And I think also being very aware of the conditions that we put in the mix. And I think about this with kids for sure, is how sometimes as parents, as teachers, how conditional we can be with young people, and they feel it. I feel it. Like, if you do these things and you perform this way, or you behave in this way, then everything's good. But if you don't, it's not. And I think the investing in bonds where you're also checking your own conditions with your partner, your kids, or because they might not even be aware of your conditions. It might be your conditions are in your head of like, I need these things, or I want these things, and they don't actually come out of your mouth, but they're conditions. And it shows, trust for me shows up really when I'm able to invest in that bond and show up and really try my best to keep the conditions aside and be present as much as I possibly can for that person.
I love, Phil, that you brought up, this was like a total mic drop moment there. You brought up that part of the human journey is to invest trust, and then sometimes that backfires. But integrity is not to be perfect and do everything right, but integrity is the virtue and value of being able to clean up and coming back stronger, right? And forming bonds actually based on things that maybe also didn't work. I remember actually you and I met in a project that started with all like strong ambitions and aspirations, and brought together a lot of people, and we raised significant amounts of money, and lots of things happened. But the main thing that we thought we were all doing, which was at the time building a school, it didn't physically happen, right? Learning cohorts started, and parents met new types of educators. And I think a lot of positive change rippled out of this time, that we call Exploration Center back in Vancouver Island. But then you and I lost touch. I remember that during COVID. And last November, we were brought together by the Great Mystery again, literally synchronistically meeting each other here at in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And in that moment, at least for me, and I think we shared this in person before, it was probably similar for you, there was this moment of like, there's something bigger happening here that kind of, it brought so much trust in all of these initial moments of bonding, of connection, of trusting you the first time around, of realizing this person is on such a meaningful journey. I need to learn more from Phil. And it wasn't that in the in-between I like doubted that much, but it just, it became, it wasn't as apparent anymore. And then when life brought us back together, there was this almost external moment where trust occurred to me again. I'm like, I clearly need to pay more attention. Like, here we are meeting again halfway around the world without planning on meeting, and life has brought us back together. And for me, maybe that's one of those moments where, things get even more meaningful, or trust can become even deeper when it breathes also, and it breathes with the expansion and the contraction of what can happen in the journey of life.
I think for children to be in settings where there was a lot of trust felt, it's a pretty remarkable thing. They shine and they feel it. And I'm sure you have a lot more experience, Kath and Phil, having run learning centers when the children are around adults who are trusting either in the process, or trusting in their vision, or trusting in just the container that it is.
I just think there are a lot of kids that have been harmed by the system, not just in school systems, but, there's a lot of people with subpar families. And it's really important that we create safe places where they can trust adults. And I think that there needs to be a lot of work with the adult population as well, because, they're in a survival mode. So it's very hard to be, your best self when you're in the system that they're operating in. So we need to create better systems for all the adults who are surrounding these young people. And
this is huge, what you just said, right? Like, how can we be our best self when we all come together feeling like, I don't even know if I can trust. I don't even know if I'm okay to be me here. Yeah.
And in a sense, I'm coming from a future children standpoint, because I can say what happens when that trust is there for the children, and the adults are appropriately able to be who they are, and they see the other adults, and then they feel that trust and that vulnerability, and then they flourish, and they immediately go to a higher vibration, and it doesn't work for every child. So let's say there's 60 kids or whatever it is. It's not like this is going to happen for every child. But if the environment is loving and trusting, and if there are role models that are perhaps even soul models that are there, that are interacting with each other. And what I learned, which shouldn't have surprised me and touched me as deeply as it did, but I learned it again with my family, is that when I started crying, trying to tell a story, and got choked up, and I started crying, the children came up to me afterwards to hug me. They know crying. We adults are sometimes far away from it. And when they see an adult crying, their immediate response is to comfort, and is to come closer to, which is sometimes the exact opposite in other settings. It's like, oh, I shouldn't be crying, or, oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, let me pull myself together, or whatever. Instead, their love is being received as the medicine for me. And it's my job not to say, that's enough of this. We have the next thing on the agenda, so let's stop. I'm okay now. But no, my job at that point was to let that happen, and then more children came.
That's a beautiful example, and that's, you know, it's metaphorically, I mean, I'm stretching the sense of the word here a little bit, but that's what regeneration means to me. Is that feeling of interconnection. I actually remember when I was a child and I cried, our cat would always come to me. It was just like, it was a thing that kept happening. Like you know, our domestic cat would come over and purr and, you know, whatever, be around for pets. And it's quite interesting because those are, I mean, these are, maybe that was a very small example of interconnection, but those are very real phenomena that all humans know when we pay attention, when we're actually in our heart. And it's the opposite of what the linear mind fears, of like, oh, well, then it's all feelings then, isn't it? It's like, no, but this is one of the very, very real, I would call it like a red thread of life and of interconnection. And when we live in that and we honor that, then optimism kind of becomes a natural next choice, you know, optimism for the world. I'm curious, you know, we've been on for a while and this has been very exciting, but maybe we want to leave it on the topic of optimism. So I'm curious for the three of you, how does that process look of continuously coming back to optimism, of finding, seeing, and knowing about this interconnection of all things? Because I can imagine that not all days are the same, and there might be some days where optimism is closer and some days where optimism is further. And, you know, hope you have hope in the name. So I'll start with you. Like, how does that process look for you?
Well, I am very hopeful. I am living in my name more now than ever. And I think being in the presence of a global community who are all very hopeful and optimistic, but also active. I think hope is, I'm coming to feel, it's an action. It's not just this thing that happens, it is an action. And so what brings my optimism closer is to be in the midst and to support and be a catalyst or be a connector of this hope or optimism in action. And especially when it's not just one person, but there's people coming together, filling in holes and gaps and supporting when somebody's having a particularly down day. You've got a hopeful, optimistic container around you with resources and energy. And that is what I'm committed to moving forward with many other people. So yeah, I'm excited, and I'm also excited to have as many young people in that hopeful container as possible.
Well, I feel like I might be your twin hope, because you know, I'm all about action too. So I can't just sit there when we've got this huge educational problem at our, you know, in our midst. I mean, it's a massive, people not going back to school. There are 5,000 dropouts in high school in Iowa alone. And like, there are so many great ideas, and, you know, the magic that Phil does, like all of this stuff needs to be incorporated in a new way of doing education. So for me, it's about finding co-creators who are also action-oriented, that want to bring and put stuff in the middle, right? So we can all benefit, we can all fundraise, and we can all fill in each other's, the things that are missing, right? So that we can co-create together something really extraordinary that the world hasn't seen yet. So that's what gets me excited, and to be able to actualize these systems. And to actually just take some steps, you know, it can be a small step, but that's a huge motivator to get going in a direction. So for anyone who's thinking about it, just to take a couple of small steps in that direction and see what happens, because everyone I talk to who does that, a whole world opens up in front of them, and you'll see a lot of people out there wanting to do the same thing if you just look. Yes.
Hear, hear.
Very, very hopeful. This generation is amazing.
Yeah, I would say our children are, I mean, my two children, they are my hope as well, watching them. They are so inspiring.
I'm thinking about Bucky in the sense that when people thought of him, when he would say things like making the world work for 100% of humanity without disadvantaging the natural world, and they would introduce him as being an optimist, he was really quite offended by the word. And part of the reason why he was offended by the word was because he felt that he was really working with what was real, meaning, nature's coordinate system. And he was also a person of great faith. He believed in the genius in every child. And because he believed in the genius in every child, and he believed in the engineering principles that he would learn and test and try and invent things, he believed that optimism was irrelevant. What was important, was this belief that only integrity counts, and that we're all whole, and that it's not a dualistic, you're either a pessimist or you're an optimist, that you're a realist, meaning that you really believe in the best of humanity. He came from the lineage of the transcendentalists. So Emerson and Thoreau, it was his great aunt, Margaret Fuller, who everybody used to say the smartest person in the room is Margaret. So we don't hear her name that much, but that's the world he came from, the transcendentalists. And there was, at the very basis of that community, that was a regenerative community that had made so many mistakes and did so many things that could have been thought of as a failure. But everybody knows Little Women, and everybody knows Walden, and everybody knows, Henry David Thoreau. I mean, there's something that lives on. And I think for Bucky, he lived it as this inventor who believed in the integrity that every human being is born with a gift, is a genius. And I believe that too.
Beautiful. Well, this has been a great hour, very insightful. And, I love this. Thanks, Phil, for challenging the dualism of optimism and pessimism here at the end, because I think it's extremely valuable to continuously upgrade the way we think, the way we believe, right? And the nature's coordinates filling in is a concept that I'll be taking forward for sure. And the invitation for everyone listening is to step into the infinite game and participate, and check out the brilliant projects that Hope, Catherine, Phil are doing in their own rights, and together in a collaborative way. And try it out, step forward, right, Catherine? In your words, like take 3 steps in that direction, and usually that already gets momentum rolling. So thank you so much for tuning in today, and thank you all for making the time.
Thank you, Julian.
Thank you, Julian.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the subscribe button below, follow and stay up to date with all of our new content coming out on betterworlds.com and all things regeneration.